Well, today I'm going to kick off a brand new teaching series. It'll last the next 5 weeks. It's called The In Commandments. And the truth is, I've had the concept of this series kind of batting around in my head for about 4 years now. It's all going to come out over the next 5 weeks, so get ready for me just to give it all to you straight, okay? Now, here's the idea. Each one of these 5 weeks has an individual application element to it, but the concept as a whole will hold things together that I think are important ways to connect with your faith or your journey toward faith right now. Now, here's the truth. Various pastors, we all have different passions, right? And there's things other guys are passionate about that I'm not, and vice versa. Some people are passionate about, like, the end of times and explaining how all that's going to work. I'm not passionate about that at all. I just think, Christ is coming again, and you should be ready. That's basically all you need to know about that. But there are a couple of things I am very passionate about, two that I want to name to you. One is this. I want everyone to understand how following Jesus fits into real life. And so it's a big goal of mine for Christianity to make sense to you for how it works on Monday, not just on Sunday. That's a big deal to me. And I want it to make sense to you, but I also want you to experience the power and the presence of God and the way that can shape you between Monday and Sunday. So that's a big deal, and this series will get at some of that. The other thing that I'm really, really passionate about is figuring out why it is that some people don't follow Jesus. There are people who maybe have never followed Jesus. There are people who grew up in homes where people followed Jesus, but now they don't follow Jesus. They grew up in church, but now they no longer follow Jesus. And I am absolutely fascinated. So I read and I listen and I research and try to figure out why is it that people don't follow Jesus. Many of you in the room who are not followers of Jesus have been very kind to me. You've let me buy you coffee and hear your story, and I genuinely appreciate it. And I find a few very common reasons that people don't follow Jesus or don't follow Jesus anymore. Let's be honest about them. One of the reasons people don't follow Jesus is because they feel like it limits their life too much. They don't want to be what they feel like is restricted in their life. I actually think it's a better life, but some people feel it's a restriction. They want to do what they want to do, and so they don't follow Jesus. They just want to do their own thing. All right? Some people don't follow Jesus. I hear this all the time, because they had a bad experience with people who follow Jesus. They had a bad experience with Christians. And I just want you to know, I think that is a terrible reason to stop following Jesus. Listen, you had a bad haircut once. You did. And you didn't give up on haircuts. You went to a different person to get your haircut. And just because you've come across followers of Jesus who are cranky or mean or unloving or judgmental or whatever, that's a terrible reason for giving up on Jesus himself. Another reason that I find people stop following Jesus, and this is kind of crazy to me, is they have some experience, often with the Bible, often with the Old Covenant or the Old Testament in the Bible, that is troublesome for them. There's some rule in the Old Covenant that doesn't resonate with them, and they think, I can't deal with that. Or maybe there's some interpretation of the Bible that they've heard, and they think, I can't deal with that. Or maybe there's some historical thing that they look at and say, hey, archaeology doesn't quite line up perfectly with how the Bible, and I can't deal with that. And I always try to tell people, listen, I respect that piece of a journey, but I also think that's a terrible reason for not following Jesus. Because the old covenant is not your covenant. The new covenant in Christ is our covenant. And I try to take responsibility for this as a pastor and even as a church and say, here's what I think is true. The church has failed at communicating what the foundation of our faith is. Because the old covenant is not the foundation of our faith. You could even say, and be careful when I say this, the Bible itself isn't the foundation of our faith. The Bible tells us what the foundation of our faith is. And as I described last week, I've been trying to describe a lot, the foundation of our faith is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Christianity was and is a resurrection religion. That's what it is. And I, of course, said last week, everyone agrees on this. If you believe Jesus rose from the dead, you're going to be a follower of Jesus. If you don't believe he rose from the dead, you're not going to be a follower of Jesus. And I had a couple conversations afterwards where people were like, are you sure about that? And I thought, well, tell me this story where you believe that Jesus rose from the dead, but you have a problem with a verse in the Old Testament, and so now you're not going to follow the one who rose from the dead? It doesn't make any sense. Christianity is a resurrection religion, but that's been tenuous at different points in history. In fact, it was actually quite tenuous only a few decades after Jesus rose from the dead. As the gospel was spreading and people were doing tremendous things, and we see the power of God on planet Earth, there were certain people who wanted to say, no, it's not about the resurrection. What people need to do if they want to be followers of Jesus is follow all the old rules, all the old covenant rules, and do that first and become that, and then move into the new covenant. And there was a church council meeting. That sounds exciting, doesn't it? You ever been to a church council meeting? That might be a good reason to leave Christianity. I'm just kidding. It's not really a good reason. But in this meeting, James stands up, and this is what he says. He says, "It's my judgment, therefore, we should not make it difficult for Gentiles who are turning to God." We should not make it difficult for Gentiles who are turning to God. You know who Gentiles are? It's everyone who's not Jewish. Jewish people had an old covenant. That old covenant was being fulfilled, and now there was a new covenant in Christ. And the question was, if you're not Jewish, do you have to go back through the old covenant to the new covenant? And James says, no, you do not. You do not. We should not make it more difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. We shouldn't lay all those old rules on top of them. And this is really powerful, because it takes Christianity from being a rules-based religion to a resurrection religion. It takes us from basing our whole faith on the 10 Commandments to basing our whole faith on who Jesus is and what I'm going to describe over the next 5 weeks as the in commandments. And here's the idea. I want you over the next 5 weeks with us to try to set yourself in the place where you're listening to Jesus teach the things that he's going to teach. He has these 5 commandments. The reason I call them the in commandments is because they're commandments that say, do not. But they're not really rules. He says, do not be afraid. Do not sin. Do not judge. Do not doubt. Do not worry. And he suggests to us that in the life of following Jesus, it's actually possible in each one of these ways of our lives to live these in commandments out. And so today we're going to start with fear. Now, I want you to just think about it, think honestly in your mind. Like, pretty much all of us are probably afraid of something. For some of us, those are big fears. For some of us, they're small fears. The thing that fear does in your life, like whatever you're afraid of, the thing that fear does in your life is it has control over you. It shapes your behavior. It means you will move or you won't move because of fear. It paralyzes you sometimes. It will keep you from doing the right thing because you're afraid. Fear has a tremendous power over our own lives. So when Jesus says, do not be afraid, that's what he's speaking into. So here's what I'm going to do today. This is a very common commandment of Jesus. It shows up all throughout the biographies of the people who wrote about Jesus. We're going to sit in the biography of Matthew for a little bit, and I'm going to show you 3 different scenarios from Jesus' life, Matthew 8, Matthew 10, and Matthew 14. I'm actually going to start in the middle with Matthew 10 and see how this kind of weaves together for the people who were followers of Jesus. And so I'm going to try to describe some of these settings, and I want you to try to think of yourself in this setting, hearing Jesus teach it in this context. So before I show you the first passage, let me set up the context. Jesus had his group of followers, and he had just told them that they were now going to be sent out from him, and he sent them out in pairs. He never sends people out alone. But this is what he says. I want you to go share my message, bring restoration, redemption to this broken world. And I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. Now, you may have heard that phrase before. You may not know it came from Jesus. This is what Jesus says. You're sheep. I want you to go share this message, and I'm sending you to the wolves. Go. You're going to run into situations where people are going to mock you. They're going to dismiss you. They might hit you. They might kill you. I don't know. That's what I'm doing. Just to be clear, everyone here who's a follower of Jesus, he would say this to you. Like there's no version of Christianity that is like, I just want to hang out and do what I want to do. Jesus says, I'm going to send you as sheep among wolves. And then this is what he says. So do not be afraid. I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. Do not be afraid. In fact, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but but cannot kill the soul. Do not be afraid. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. And I don't know about you, but like if I'm putting myself there listening to Jesus, he's like, do not be afraid, but be afraid. Like, how do I even put this together? He goes on. He says, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside of your Father's care. God is your Father. You're a child of God. He cares about the sparrows, but I'm telling you, he cares way more about people than he cares about sparrows. That's what he's saying. He cares about you. You're his children. Even the very hairs on your head are numbered, so don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Now, when he says to them, don't be afraid of the one who can kill the body, but be afraid of the one who can kill the body and the soul, they had a little bit of a head start that I haven't given you yet this morning. So I'm going to rewind to a story they had already experienced together, and you think, oh, maybe this is how they start to piece these ideas together. So Jesus had, finished doing some teaching, miracles. There was a whole crowd, and lots of times the way Jesus would get away from the crowd is he would get in a boat and go across the Sea of Galilee. Sometimes they call it a lake. You could probably think of it like we think of Lake Michigan. But that's how he would do it. So this is the story we pick up in Matthew chapter 8. It says, then he got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Suddenly, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. Now, some of you actually been out on Lake Michigan before, and something like this may have even happened, because sometimes Lake Michigan's calm and beautiful, and if you're out there during a storm, it's awful. And this is the feeling that they had. It was this kind of immediate fear. Now, some of you haven't been on Lake Michigan, but just think about this feeling. Think about the setting. Some of you have been on an airplane, and all of a sudden there's turbulence, right, or a storm, or I was in an airplane once and I got struck by lightning, and it's like, yeah! Like, you just, all of a sudden you feel afraid. A few years ago, I was with my wife and my 2 kids. They were young at the time, and we were all in Liberia, Africa. This is an underdeveloped country, and we ended up in a situation where, in a country I don't know, with my little kids, there was a rainstorm, then our vehicle broke down, and we were stranded. And I'm like, what did I do bringing my kids to Liberia? Right? There's just this fear that grips you. This is what's going on. So here's how the situation goes. But Jesus was sleeping. Now, I have a friend who suggests that at this stage, Jesus was actually what we call parent sleeping. You know what parent sleeping is? Parent sleeping is, I'm trying to sleep, I'm not asleep, but now my kids start talking around me, so I'm just going to act like I'm asleep. Because I'm really curious what's going to get said. So I don't know that Jesus was parent sleeping. Maybe he was overhearing this conversation. Maybe he was really sleeping. But the disciples went and woke him up, saying, Lord, save us. We're going to drown. That's the fear they felt. They thought, we're going to die. We're going to drown. And he replied, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? And I don't know, I'm kind of resonating with the disciples on this side. Like, Jesus, we told you why we're afraid. We're going to drown. It's not an unreasonable fear. We're going to drown. That's why we're afraid. Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. Can you imagine being in that setting? Just moments ago, you were afraid because you thought you were going to drown. And then your friend stands up and he speaks to creation, and it obeys him. This is how Matthew describes it. The men were amazed, and they asked, what kind of man is this? I mean, we've seen him do the water to the wine thing. Like that was something. We've heard amazing teaching. We're blown away. Like, we're committed to following him. But he just spoke to the wind and the waves, and they obeyed him. What kind of man is this? When Mark, another biographer of Jesus, tells this exact same story, he's telling the same scenario, he gives a concluding phrase to it, which is literally interpreted this way. It says, they feared a great fear. They feared a great fear. Do you get what's going on here? They were afraid they were going to drown. And then in a moment, they realized, we're not going to drown, But we have something even bigger to be afraid of. I'm standing next to the guy who controls the wind and the waves. It's almost like he's the one who spoke creation into existence, and it listens to him, and now he speaks to it again, and that listens to him. So I was afraid of drowning, but now I'm afraid. I mean, just work with me here, right? What did he say 2 chapters later? He said, don't be afraid of the one who can kill the body, but be afraid of the one who could destroy both the body and the soul. See, this is the key idea here. They didn't have it all figured out, but their fear shifted. This is a very significant piece of their life. I was afraid of things that could kill the body. I was afraid I was going to drown. And then I experienced Jesus in the fullness of his power, and now I'm not afraid I was going to drown. I'm afraid of the one who I walk behind every day. Let me move on. Fast forward past the teaching he did. I'm going to go all the way to Matthew chapter 14. We have another scene where they're on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and instead of this time of Jesus getting in the boat with them and going across, it lays itself out a little differently. It says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat. And I think, yeah, he probably made them get in the boat after what they went through last time when they were with him in the boat. And then they had the boat go on ahead of him. So you can kind of picture this, right? Like it's a boat. You can picture it maybe up on the beach like of Lake Michigan, and they all get in, and they're getting their feet wet, while they're getting in the boat. But Jesus takes the boat, and he's actually the one, probably with some help, pushing it out, right? And he walks out into the lake. It's up to his ankles, then up to his knees, then up to his waist, then up to his chest, and he says, "All right, you guys go to the other side of the lake." And then he comes back, and he dismissed the crowd that had been waiting there. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. There's a mountain just right next to the Sea of Galilee. Now, this is actually very important. Jesus had a rhythm of his life that is a model for us, which says it's not okay to work. That's relying on yourself. You need a rhythm of your life that works and then rests, that works and then renews. It's okay to step away. It's okay to go talk to God. It's actually a really healthy rhythm of your life. So he goes up on this mountain to pray, even when there were crowds who wanted him to do something else. Then, later that night, he was there alone up on the mountainside, looking over the lake, and the boat that he had sent out was already a considerable distance from the land. So they were out there, they were rowing across to the other side of the lake. It was already a considerable distance of the land, and yet still in sight of Jesus. It was being buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Now, this isn't a storm. This isn't, it's coming up, we're going to drown. That's not what this is. This is just, we're working against the wind. We're working against the wind. Boy, it's a lot easier to sail across this lake when the wind's at your back instead of in your face. This is like the original rowing machine. They're rowing and rowing and rowing, blisters, but they're not making much progress. So much so that shortly before dawn, like Jesus had been on the mountain all night, and he could still see them. So, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. That's how the story goes. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. They were afraid. They were really, really afraid. That's what terrified means. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "You losers, you losers, you losers." Now, that's not actually what Jesus said to them, but I want to live with this for a second, because even though I'm saying it different than Jesus said it, it's kind of what he was saying. He's saying, you failed. Listen, you remember when we were in the boat, and you thought you were going to die, and you were afraid of that, but then I spoke to the wind and the waves, and then remember, we had a little lesson about this. We said, don't be afraid of the one who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Instead, be afraid. We've talked about this. He said, it doesn't seem like you're getting it. Here's what it seems like. It seems like you have something to be afraid of, and you're still afraid. That's what it seems like to me. It seems like you have something to be afraid of, and you're still afraid. And I've been teaching you to do something differently. Now, I know people probably spoke to you in your life. Jesus to them, me to you. People probably spoke to you in your life. And somewhere along the way, your mom or someone else said, listen, you don't have anything to be afraid of. And you didn't believe them. I'm telling you, I don't believe them either. Because there's things to be afraid of. There's plenty in this world to be afraid of. But here's the problem. When you have something to be afraid of, you're still afraid. So Jesus didn't say, you losers. Here's what Jesus actually said. He said, take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid. I'm not telling you there isn't something to be afraid of. That's not what I'm telling you. I'm telling you this, that we don't have to be afraid, even when there's something to be afraid of. This is different. There are things that are out there that will harm your body. There are things that are out there that will make it look like the things of this world aren't going to go the way that you want to. And I get it, they're fearful. But I'm telling you that we don't have to be afraid even when there's things to be afraid of. And think about what's happening here. These followers of Jesus, they could say, yeah, remember, because he was with us in the boat. And even though there was something to be afraid of, we didn't have to be afraid because he was with us. And then we were in this boat alone, and he wasn't physically with us, but he was watching us. And now he's with us, and even though there's something to be afraid of, we don't have to be afraid. This is so powerful, my friends, because it's not true that there's nothing to be afraid of. It's true. There are things to be afraid of, but you don't have to be afraid. I have a friend who went through a horribly traumatic divorce years ago. And I was talking to him even about this phrase a little bit. He said, Greg, it wasn't exactly that phrase, but here's basically what happened. In kind of the moments of trauma following the divorce, the weeks and really months and years of trauma, when I didn't know what was going to happen to my kids, and I didn't know what was going to happen financially, and I didn't know if I was ever going to be married again, and I didn't know. There was plenty to be afraid of. He said, I'd have to get up in the morning, and it was almost a discipline. Before I let my feet touch the floor, I would say something like this. Listen, I don't have to be afraid. Even when there's things to be afraid of. Because God is with me. God is watching me. I don't have to be afraid of the things that can kill the body, but can't kill the soul. Because my gaze has shifted. If I'm going to be afraid of something, if I'm going to let fear control me, how about the fear of God? The one who could kill both the body and the soul. I'll take my rest in that. And so I actually want to ask all of you to do something with me here. Just a little participation today. I'm going to ask all of you to say this phrase out loud with me in a minute. And I know, probably even right now in the room, people are reacting different ways. Like some of you are like, yeah, this is exactly what I needed today. I walked in with this situation. It seems like God had this message for me today. I can't wait to say that out loud with you, Greg. Some of you are followers of Jesus. And you're still a little skeptical. You're like, Greg, I see what you did, weaving those three passages together, but I'm just asking you today. Say this passage out loud with me. Some of you are not even followers of Jesus. Some of you think, walk on the water, that never happened. You can't even get your head around miracles like that. But I want to ask you if you can get your head around this. That it's possible that you don't have to be afraid even when there's something to be afraid of. So would you all just collectively say this out loud with me, every one of us? We don't have to be afraid even when there's something to be afraid of. So, I don't know if this will make you feel better, but Jesus' followers who went through these three things with him, they still didn't get it. they kept failing. I mean, fast forward to the upper room right before Jesus goes to the cross, and he tells them, he says, hey, I'm getting ready to go through this, and you're all going to walk away from me because you're afraid. And Peter's like, not me, I would never do that. And then he did it. And after Jesus died, the same people who were in the boat with Jesus and heard him say this and saw him walk on the water, they were all afraid. And they all went and huddled up in a room behind a locked door because they didn't know what was going to happen to them. And there wasn't anybody on Easter morning who got up early, camped outside the tomb, and thought, you know what's going to happen this morning? Resurrection. In fact, let's all get together. Let's count it down together. 10, 9, 8. That was not happening. Nobody did that. They were all afraid. And then Jesus rose from the dead. And this is why Christianity was and is a resurrection religion. Because finally, after he rose from the dead, after people could see it with their own eyes, you know what? I don't have to be afraid of the one who can kill the body. I should just be afraid of the one who can kill the body and the soul. All of a sudden, these guys weren't afraid. These ladies were not afraid. And the whole story of Christianity sits on the resurrection to say the command of Jesus, do not be afraid, is possible. Because I'm not afraid anymore of the things that can kill the body. I'm going to carry this message of redemption and restoration. I'm going to face courts that are unjust. I'm going to face people who want to kill me. I'm going to face stonings or death, all those things. And I'm going to do it anyway. Because I'm not afraid of the people who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. My fear has shifted. And that's what Jesus invites all of us into. That's what he means when he says, do not be afraid. Take courage. It is I. I'm with you. I'm not telling you you don't have something to be afraid of. I'm telling you you don't have to be afraid. Even when there is something to be afraid of. And so I'm going to pray for us in just a couple of minutes, as I do to close every message, but I really just for a couple of minutes want you to think about the fears. And they're the fears that control your life. They're the fears that paralyze you from doing what you want to do, what you dream to do, what you think God wants you to do. They're the fears that keep you from doing what is right because you're afraid of what you will lose in the process. They're the fears of relational situations. Whatever your fear is. It's a real fear. But you can't let that one control you. You have to know that Christ is with you and he is watching you and he has a power. And so just before I pray here for a moment, I just want to ask everyone to close your eyes for a minute. You don't have to bow your head. Do whatever's comfortable for you, but just close your eyes and bring to mind whatever your fear is. It might be that you're afraid of losing a child, or you're afraid of losing another child, or you're afraid of losing a marriage, or you're afraid of what it will cost you to do the right thing. And I just want you to hear the words of Jesus. Do not be afraid. Do not fear the ones who can kill the body. But fear the one who has the control over the destiny of your body and your soul. You don't have to be afraid, even when there's something to be afraid of. God, thank you for the teaching of Jesus and the miracles of Jesus, but ultimately the resurrection of Jesus, to show us that you have the power over life and death. God, I pray we can walk with you and not be afraid. In Jesus' name.